many colleagues around the world. It's a great opportunity to present research from the Netherlands I did with Linde Boeien at Utrecht University, even though it's from my study. Thanks for attending, and also thanks to the organizers for doing such a wonderful job in bringing musicians together from all around the world. The subject of today is given names in Turkish migrants for over 3 generations in the Netherlands. The main question concerns how acculturation is found in the given names of children across 3 generations. Is there separation or integration? And if so, how? But let me first introduce the scene. In the 60s of the previous century, there was labor shortage in Western Europe, which led to migration, initially from Italy and Greece, followed by migrants from Turkey and Morocco. During some decennia, 136 Turkish men and partners came to the Netherlands. Their main origin were the mountainous and rural areas of central Anatolia, but among them were also Kurds from the eastern Turkish provinces. The migrants from Turkey had to deal with great differences in culture. They had to learn a new language, Dutch as a Germanic Indo-European language, while Turkish is Altaic. Moreover, their religion is mainly the Islam, while Western Europe dominantly is Christian. From rural areas, they had to accustom to Dutch city life, which among others include riding bicycles. During this process of acculturation, they formed families, mainly with partners from Turkey, and got children. Naming children is an act of expressing identity. And since Turkish and Dutch, or more generally Western name inventories, are highly disjunct, choices are really distinctive. Following Becker and Berry, 4 options of acculturation strategies are open. First, choose a given name unknown in both the Netherlands and Turkey, which is marginalization. Or choose a Dutch name, which is full assimilation. Or choose a Turkish name, which denotes separation. Or choose for integration through names which are both known in Turkish and Dutch, but these are rare. Or by a European name with international appeal. But let me first quote some of 24 parents we interviewed about their motives. My grandparents lived in a small village in the mountains. Their view of the world was far more limited than mine. I get to know new modern names much easier, and I'm more open to them than they were. Or, even when you are not practicing your faith, it's part of the culture to choose an Islamite name. Or, I wish to give my children a Turkish name, because that represents our roots. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know who you are. To perform our research, we had exceptional data from the Dutch civil registration. These include for the full population an idea, the full given name, the year, place, and country of birth, and the ID of the parents. This allowed to identify Turkish migrants, their names, and those of their children and grandchildren. In a wider perspective, these data are part of the Dutch corpus of given names I talked about last conference, based on the names of 26 million Dutch citizens from 1790 onward. With high coverage, especially for the time after 1960, and this is the time we are interested in for the current research. You can access popularity of individual names yourself online, as shown here for the Turkish name of Deniz, given to children after the start of migration around 1960. Before that time, the name did not appear in the Netherlands. With the focus on Turkish migrants, here is the distribution of the year of birth of the 3 generations. defined according to Statistics Netherlands. The first generation, born in Turkey, constitutes of 136,000 migrants. After 1960, they got children in the Netherlands as the second generation, which now constitute of 225,000 persons. And over the last 20 years, the third generation of grandchildren is emerging and is being born and now constitute about 30,000 individuals and obviously will grow further. But let us now have a look at the top 20 of given names from the first generation of migrants born in Turkey and compare these with the top 20 for all children born in Turkey in 1960. It's not necessary to consider all names separately, but corresponding names are colored, and this correspondence is high, especially implying that the migrants have a reasonable representative name distribution for Turkey. Also note that the typical Turkish I dot did not make it to the Dutch administration, as possibly also a choice of parents. For the second generation born in the Netherlands, through the color we still see a high correspondence with naming in Turkey in 2000. This suggests a strong cultural focus on Turkey still. In the third generation, however, we see especially for the girls a deviation from the preferences in Turkey in 2020. The correspondence is much less. Presumably the bonds with Turkey are loosened, which especially comes out for females. As could be seen from the previous top 20 lists, name choices vary over time. They are subject to fashion. In this slide, we group females around 5 fashion patterns and show these for both the second and third generation between 1975 and 2020. Names come and go over time, but there is no major difference between generations. In short, for fashion, time is dominant over generation. As you can see here for the curves of Elif and Zainab, which really are comparable for the same years across generations 2 and 3. This pattern shows for male names as well, although the groups around Mehmet in blue and Muhammad in brown seem less popular for the third generation, while the group of Emir is equally popular. We can go to a higher level of name grouping by differentiating between Turkish, Arabic, Dutch, English, and other European names. This is a tricky distinction. Many names, such as Thomas, Jacob, and Anna, are widespread across Europe, and associating them to some language is often arbitrary. Still, we made an indicative distinction. We here first look into the preference of parents who both have a Turkish background. We do this for the first, the second, and third generation. It's obvious that children dominantly got Turkish names. The percentages are close to 100%, between 90 and 100%. By marrying within the Turkish community, the focus remains entirely on the Turkish culture and naming. Only for girls in the third generation, we see choices for international naming in about 20% of the children. In all generations, there are also those with Turkish background who marry a Dutch partner or one from another country. Intermarriage increases considerably with generations, as we see here. Even more than half of the children in the third generation are now born from intermarriage, while this was only 10% in the second generation. In intermarriage, parents seek to accommodate both cultures. For Turkish-Dutch parents, we see a much wider spread over name groups. With a Turkish father, more than half of both boys and girls got a Turkish name, while with a Dutch father, this is just the reverse. With 50-50%, the father and the mother would be equally influential. This indicates a slight dominance of the father, the more when a boy is concerned. both for the Turkish father and the Dutch father. We now focus on the case of a mother of Turkish background and a Dutch father. Here are the top 20 of name choices. European names are colored. I focus on some details. Both Deniz and Deniz are on top with the males. In Deniz, we see an English name with close comparable pronunciation as Turkish Deniz. Although Deniz is a classical Turkish name, it does not rank high in Turkey itself. The correspondence with Deniz is probably valued by these Turkish-Dutch parents. Even more obvious is the correspondence between Melissa and Melissa, equally pronounced in both languages, with just a spelling difference, and the choice for parents. With Lara and Dilara, we see a partial correspondence, which may be interesting for parents. While Ferdi, number 15 with the males, is short for European Ferdinand and is a Turkish name as well, meaning individual. Ferdi is very acceptable in both cultures. Finally, I would like to point to the use of double names. This is much higher in intermarriage, where it's used to choose a Western name for 1 out of 5 children, a convenient way to accommodate both families. To sum up, for Turkish parents, both of Turkish descent, separation is the choice. They live in a rather close community and wish to pass on Turkish identity and names of their children, perhaps with some more flexibility in the case of girls. Although for these parents the focus is on Turkey, it's of interest that name fashion tends to go its own way, especially for girls, while time is dominant over generation. Intermarriage is the way to integration and the choice of many in generation 2. More than half of children in generation 3 is born from intermarriage. Here, non-Turkish name choices are typically international and not traditional Dutch. But this does not deviate from what many Dutch parents choose as well. As found in other migration studies, the father shows some dominance, especially expressed in the name of boys. And double names are an elegant way to satisfy both families. This then concludes my presentation. Also, on behalf of my co-author Lindy Boeye, I wish to thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any question you may have.
Thank you so much, Gerrit. We have a comment from the chat already that asks this question. And let me remind people that you're welcome to put questions into the chat or to use your Zoom hand if you'd like to get attention and we can unmute you. And Paige says, it was a similar topic that actually inspired my interest in names, so I really enjoyed your presentation. My undergraduate thesis analyzed cultural assimilation and naming patterns in the US, and I'm trying to integrate these topics into my marketing and branding research now for my PhD. Would you mind sharing your bibliography? And do you know if any papers concerning global naming patterns, do you know of any papers concerning global naming patterns and marketing? And Paige,
sorry for the typos, I was just excited.
Sure, I would like to share any of my data, and if this is possible within privacy constraints. Right. And bibliography also would be fine. So send me an email and I'll return this. The question about marketing, I don't know actually. I haven't looked into that so much.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know if maybe it had come up in neat places, because that's kind of the issue I'm having, is like that connection. I know that it is there. It seems very obvious that global naming patterns very much mirror the types of patterns that are in global marketing and things like that. I just am trying to find that connection if anyone's made it yet. But yeah, I will definitely get your email from the abstract and I'll send you an email. Thank you.
No problem. I only know that it was about 10 years ago when Coca-Cola had a kind of action here where they wanted to put first names on their cans, and they want to have a contract with me for the top names in the Netherlands. So yes,
wow.
yes, sometimes given names are really used in advertisement campaigns. Right.
Thank
I hope
you.
they gave you a lifetime supply of Coca-Cola.
Oh,
I hope that's part
I
of your
hope not,
contract.
no.
While we're checking to see if anybody else from the group has questions, would you please say a couple things about whether the results of your study confirmed what you anticipated? I would think, for instance, that especially you would anticipate that by the third generation, you'd see more patterns for assimilation. So as you were testing your hypotheses, what turned out to be true or expected or not?
What I expected, and that also comes from sociology studies in Germany on Turkish migrants. Studies where they did not mention any name actually, but they studied on a very high level. That indeed there was a tendency that the fact that it's Islam really made up the choices of Turkish patterns, and there was not so much integration. What surprised me actually most was the third generation, that half of these children were born in intermarriage. And that was a percentage I never had anticipated that high. And actually, I would like to do this kind of research and also for the Morocco and other groups, Suriname, from Suriname in the Netherlands, and to see whether these groups have corresponding patterns, because they all came in the 60s. So we now have there's an emerging third generation, and this is just the time we can do the first research on that, and that's very intriguing.
That sparks the thought. Oh, go ahead. Cleve has a question. Thanks.
This is, I guess half an observation and half a question. In the United States, it's very hard to get data at the level where you know exactly who is from a mixed marriage, and who isn't, for instance. But one of the things that from the data I do sort of can interpret in the United States, it seems that there's a very different attitude about assimilation, even in the first generation, between immigrants from Muslim countries, but also Hindu, people from India versus people from East Asia. Is that the people in the United States who are immigrants from Korea or China or Vietnam seem to, even in the initial generation, or the second generation born, seem to be given quote unquote American, first names, and that the Chinese or Vietnamese name, if they have it, would be put the middle name position, while both the Muslims and the Hindus seem to feel a pressure still to give their child a name which definitely is from either connected with either Islam or Hinduism. And although I have seen, as I was very fascinated by your Deniz and Deniz, data, with Deniz being much more common in with Turkish immigrants in the Netherlands than it actually is back in Turkey, because it sounds like, a Dutch name. And among Hindu parents in the United States, Rohan, R-O-H-A-N, I think was much more common recently than it was in India, for a similar reason, because it fits more in, even though it's obviously a Hindu name, it fits more in with the names Americans are giving their sons than a lot of other Hindu names might.
Yes, yes, yes. These are observations really good. Thank you, Cleve. I think also in the Netherlands, immigrants from Southeast Asia, indeed, and China and Korea, indeed, easily choose adapt easily to Western European or European names. Although there was last a paper in names of someone who wanted to really use her Chinese name because that's major part of her identity, and that was an interesting paper. Yes, and indeed, Islam plays an important role. The religion is dominant, and as a motivation for choosing names of children. Although for the Turkish parents, we interviewed 24 Turkish parents and asked for their motives. Yeah, well, Islam, it's about meaning, that they find it very important that a name has a good meaning, and that should be a Turkish name usually then. I see also a question in the chat about substantive in Turkey. Yes, that part of the Turkish names are from the Islam, but also part are substantives, and therefore, in that case, the meaning of that name is very important. So yes, well, these are the major things. Yeah, thank you.
And I can call that out if you like. The question from Alexa in chat. Are Turkish names typically also common substantives in Turkish, i.e. how Rose is both a name and a common noun? Also, how common is that in Dutch names? And
in Dutch names,
yeah. And then also adding that this type of research is impossible here in Mesoamerica. Many children are never registered, and more are double and tripled registered under different names by different family members. But the question then has to do with the substantives.
Yeah. Well, indeed, in the Netherlands, we also have these names that have a direct meaning. Flowers, there are many flowers, although I have the impression that it's less than being used than in the US, for instance. So both in Turkey and the Netherlands, you can choose these kinds of names. Yeah, well, and concerning the type of research, yes, I'm really happy that in the Netherlands we can have access to these data by law, and that's really exceptional. Usually these data are presented by statistical institutes and not onomasticians, and so here in the Netherlands we are exceptional in the exceptional case that we have these data, and I have lots of years to go to do all the research I want to do on this.
You mentioned the other groups of migrants who have become prominent in the Netherlands. I would imagine, now here I'm speculating, that by the third generation or so, you will find some marriages that are blending two different migrant group names in addition to migrant and Dutch names.
Yeah, well, the Moroccan names are highly Arabic, and so we see these kinds of families as well. There's also, and that's more difficult for to investigate, that there's a huge Turkish community in Germany. So if you have parents coming from Germany and with Turkish descent in the Netherlands, you should be aware that these could be Turkish parents as well, of a partner as well. So you should be careful in interpreting these external data. But I would expect the same type of results for the other groups, although the Suriname and Antillean groups may be different because these also have a focus on US naming.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation with you today, and I know that we wish you the best as you continue your research, and we hope to see it in print, some of it in names. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.